Evil Pixel.
Competitive esport gaming is becoming an increasingly popular sport in today's industry. And the new IP from Blizzard took esports by storm with the release of a new hybrid FPS/MOBA game called Overwatch. Now, while a lot of people comment on the game's declining relevancy, there's no doubting the impact this game had and the course that it was once in up to its release. And so in today's video, we'll be discussing the early development beta of Overwatch. Arnold Sang and Jeff Kaplan gave a quick keynote discussing the early development of Overwatch back in 2017, with some very interesting highlights. The conceptualization of Overwatch began during the summer of 2013, where they came straight out of an unreleased Blizzard title called Project Titan, which I'm planning on making a video of very soon. Now, this team straight from the cancelled project were placed in a different subgroup to help expand the StarCraft IP. The artists from this team came up with a quick concept for the StarCraft expansion that showed an image of a prospector style character, which you may see looks mighty familiar to a later used McCree in Overwatch. Now, unfortunately, this project too never took off. Now, Bill Petras, who was the art director from World of Warcraft, later mocked up another concept image of a world for a new project. This image alone inspired the young team at Blizzard to attempt a brand new unique IP. Jeff Goodman, who was the class director for Project Titan, made a comment during a meeting that sort of got the ball rolling with the new type of game Overwatch was to become. Instead of having a game with 6 to 9 classes, there would be a game with about 50 classes, all being very different from one another, with background stories. Knowing that this many classes was a very difficult feat, the team would source out a lot of materials conceptualized from the cancelled Project Titan to assist in this idea for the new project. For example, Titan had a group of nomads called the Junkers, who were a rebellious bunch including a large guy with a hook and a pig mask. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because this eventually led to the creation of Roadhog and Junkrat. It was during this time that the team began introducing their entire concept art from Titan to inspire some other characters for this new IP, which was deemed Project Prometheus, and eventually became Overwatch. Now, of course, while these characters weren't named, they were more or less given class types such as Jumper, Assassin, Guardian, etc. The team at Blizzard then decided to give these characters a story and background in order to give players someone to identify with. They even told a story of a World of Warcraft developer who pitched an idea for a character they should use based off of a Russian woman who dual-wielded AK-47s and rode on a bear. And her ult would be the bear standing up and also wielding AK-47s. Now, this was one of only about 40 some odd character ideas thought up in one morning. Now, it's not exactly sure how many of these ideas actually made it through, but the team at Blizzard released the original slide of characters that was pitched to the higher up executives. And I gotta say, some of these would be amazing to have in Overwatch right now. From an overweight, hair-rolled, smoking geisha woman named Mama Hong, to a cool-looking cyborg punk android named Freak. Another interesting fact is that not only characters but maps from Project Titan were also used in the making of Overwatch. Some ripped directly from the concept and others altered slightly. Now, a selected number of concept characters were chosen to represent the new IP and presented it to Blizzard's partnering company, Activision. Now, of course, almost all the characters were tweaked a bit to look, feel, and represent something totally different. For example, who eventually became Reinhardt was a giant man in a mech suit named Wildebeest from South Africa. Some characters even took on the inspiration of more than one character, such as Soldier 76, who was inspired by both concept characters from Titan called Troy and Phoenix, physically that is. And other characters who didn't quite make it in the character roster did in fact make it to the overall story of Overwatch, such as Iris. Now, according to Jeff Kaplan, the only character in the game who went untouched was Winston, who remained in his conceptualized form. Now, given all this information, Activision was still not fully convinced and were given a deadline of until March of 2014 to come up with a core combat demo of the game in order to get greenlit. With this, the team at Blizzard went hard to produce a fully functioning demo consisting of one map, which is now Temple of Anubis, and only 4 characters that were agreed on, which were Tracer, Reaper, Widowmaker, and Reinhardt. Now, the first rendered playable alpha of the game was dated as early as September of 2013, which simply consisted of gray polygon platforms, the beginning phases of construction of Temple Anubis, and no characters were implemented at this point. Now 1 month later in October, Tracer, who at this point became a favorite and pretty much the game's mascot, was edited into the game in a very raw, unfinished form, with only her gloves showing, as well as a numeric health bar. The very first actual playtest of Overwatch came on November of 2013, with Tracer's guns implemented in her hand, no color yet, Widowmaker skin in Tracer's body, and Reaper implemented into the game for purposes to assist in scaling. Now later that month, the Overwatch engine was implemented in the game, and Tracer's recall would be the first ability to be shown off to the team. A fun fact about Reinhardt during development was that due to the fact that he was the first melee character implemented, the team had a very difficult time making his melee animation look smooth. The team took inspiration of a concept character called Rocket Dude, and figured that a flying rocket firing character would be a better idea of implementing into the demo rather than Reinhardt. So with some reworking, Rocket Dude eventually became Pharah, and she was put in place in Reinhardt in this demo. And so in December of 2013, a rough build of Pharah was implemented in the demo, which was extremely rough to say the least. In the demo, Pharah's rocket arm was not actually her arm, but rather just a rocket she held with her hands. Head bobbing was also addressed to make sure headshots were not so difficult to hit. Now in October of 2014, the team returned with a more solid draft of the game to the point where it was actually playable, albeit with unfinished maps. Jeff Kaplan also addressed the rumor that Overwatch was nothing more than a scaled down version of Project Titan, consisting of all its leftover materials. He stated that this was untrue, and that about 3.6 million lines of code from Project Titan had to be deleted, and only about 760,000 lines of code was kept. A server game structure had to be constructed, a global light system, and most importantly, they had to make sure the game ran at 60 frames per second across all platforms in order to please themselves and Activision. In February of 2014, items began being added, and as you can see in the video, the health packs didn't look how they look now, as before they were green capsule-like items. Temple of Anubis began getting texture and color as well, and interestingly enough, Pharah's color was finally decided as blue, and wasn't always the favorite color for her. The team was able to meet the March 2014 milestone where the teams at Blizzard would have a show and tell type meeting and show off what they were all working on. Being highly impressed by this new FPS called Project Prometheus, Blizzard decided to show the game off at BlizzCon in 2014 in a full playable form. Now because of this setted course, the team decided to have at least 12 characters ready along with 3 maps and a cinematic intro. And so 3 months later, in May of 2014, Hanzo was one of the few newer models to be implemented in the game, and actually be talked about. Originally being designed slightly different, and his ult simply being represented as a set of orbs with eyes known to them as caterpillars. Hanzo's ult originally only consisted of 1 dragon, but due to hitbox issues, it was decided to implement 2 revolving dragons instead. Now during the implementation of new heroes, ideas were thrown for the new additions, including a full-fledged hockey player, which didn't quite make it in the game, but bits of his concept were later seen in Lucio. A harpoon-wielding mech armor character which seemed to have been taken in by D.Va. Jeff Kaplan also really wanted to have a free-flight flamethrower character in the game, and ideas were drawn of a lizard-type character with mech wings, as well as a barrel flight monkey with a flamethrower similar to what you see in Diddy Kong and Super Smash Bros. Now this inevitably led to the design of a jetpack cat. A cat being a character that they really wanted to use, but in the end the idea was scrapped altogether. Blizzard also played with different types of abilities for the characters, many of which never saw the light of day, including Torbjorn's Claw Trap, which was a trap that would adhere to any surface and acted like a mine. This mine was a proximity style mine that would grab the enemy and hold them in place for a while. Reinhardt would also receive the same treatment, as he once had the ability to allow him to throw his hammer at enemies for a big damage. Early footage of Mercy and Reinhardt in April of 2014 surfaced, and it can be seen that Mercy's healing tether was green instead of yellow. And her early ult was actually giving her the ability to heal and tether multiple teammates as opposed to only one. An early version of Robot City in King's Row was a very open area with more platforms than its final form. And the earliest version of Hanamura seemed to have been a much more open area than the final form. It was at this point that the team also decided on how the character select screen should look, originally being designed as rectangular icons for the characters with their 3D models posing in the foreground. Bastian turned out to be a very difficult character to program, so his first initial gameplay video simply shows a mess of robot parts moving back and forth. Bastian's first intended ult was a volley of bouncing grenades doing a significant amount of damage to the other team, as well as also having a small shield in turret mode. And the last character showed off was Genji, who initially had his sword drawn at all times, and also had the ability to cling and stay perched to the walls, which I'm glad was removed. The game went on to be revealed in BlizzCon of 2014 with much anticipation, and saw much success in both its release and in esports. Now, while many argue that Overwatch is a dying game, I wish that Blizzard would do something about this dying fanbase, as I did enjoy playing this game in its heyday. But let me know what other differences you guys noticed in the beta footage shown. And unfortunately, that is all that was discussed of the beta and alpha versions of Overwatch. Thank you guys for watching. Check out some of our other videos if you'd like. And don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and if you like this video, consider donating to our Patreon, and give us any suggestions for any future videos. And I'll catch you all next time.